Ever heard that saying, like, behind every great man is a great historian, desperately trying to separate fact from fiction?
Hmm.
Well, that's kind of what we're diving into today.
Yeah.
Alexander the Great.
Absolutely.
And we've got some really choice source material to work with today.
We do. We're looking at Arian's Anabasis of Alexander.
Okay, so for those of us who maybe napped through history class.
He's like the OG fact checker
Okay.
of ancient Greece.
Fact checker might be pushing it, but I see what you're saying. So who is this Arian guy? Why should we trust what he has to say about Alexander, like, centuries later?
Right, because you can't just take one historian's word for it.
Right.
You know? But Arian was really meticulous. I mean, he actually cross-checked everything.
Oh, wow.
He favored eyewitness accounts from Ptolemy and Aristobulus. These are guys who were actually there with Alexander on his campaigns.
So he's like the ancient world's version of investigative journalism.
Yeah.
Like digging through the archives, finding the most credible sources.
Exactly. That's a
Yeah.
great way to put it.
I like it.
And what's really cool about Arian is that he even calls out some of the tall tales about Alexander's conquests in India
Oh, really?
that other historians were spreading.
Oh, he's calling people out.
He was committed to getting the story straight as much as possible.
I like this guy. That makes him our kind of historian. Okay, so with Arian as our guide, let's get into Alexander himself.
Yeah.
So he didn't exactly start from scratch, right?
Yeah.
He inherits this kingdom from his dad, right?
Yeah. You're talking about Philip II of Macedon.
Okay.
Yeah, we could do a whole deep dive on this guy alone.
Right.
But for now, let's just say he was a total military innovator. I mean, he conquered most of Greece. Talk about pressure, right? To be his son.
Yeah, I'd be hitting the books pretty hard, figuring out how to measure up.
Hey, totally.
So Alexander wasn't one to rest on his father's laurels. He had his own vision, from what I've heard.
Oh, yeah. Ambition, that's an understatement. And that ambition was on full display at the Battle of Granicus River. This is where Alexander explodes onto the scene. And it's a wild story.
Granicus River, give us the historical high notes.
All right. So picture this. Alexander, he's only 22 years old at this time.
Okay.
He's facing off against the mighty Persian army. Okay,
Yeah.
they're all lined up at this river crossing. It's a natural choke point, right?
Right.
Most commanders, they would play it safe.
Right.
Maybe try to, like, outmaneuver the Persians or something.
Right. Right.
Not Alexander. He charges.
Charges straight into the river
Straight into the
with the entire Persian army just waiting for him.
Yes. He leads his companion cavalry right into the heart of the Persian lines.
Talk about a bold move.
Daring, reckless, brilliant.
Yeah.
But it worked. The Persians were so shocked by this, they were totally unprepared.
What a way to make an entrance.
Talk about a shock tactic, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That must have left a mark on everyone, both armies.
It did. It solidified his reputation as this military prodigy, someone who's not afraid to break the rules. But maybe even more important, it earned him the loyalty of his troops.
Right. Because they've followed him into what seems like certain death.
Yeah.
And they've come out victorious.
Exactly. And when you're a leader, you can't buy that kind of loyalty.
No. Especially when you're trying to, take over the world. So, strategically speaking, why was Granicus River so important?
This wasn't just some small territorial thing, right? This was a message. Alexander was a force to be reckoned with, and he was coming for the Persian Empire.
Bold move.
Oh, yeah.
But Alexander's story isn't all military genius. Right. There's a much darker side to his leadership.
Yes, definitely.
And the Siege of Tyre, I think, really exemplifies that. So what happened to Tyre?
Tyre. Okay, so this was an island city, right? Heavily fortified. It was considered practically untakeable. But it was a strategic prize because it controlled all these trade routes in the Mediterranean. And Alexander, as we've seen, did not back down from a challenge.
But an island city, that's a whole other thing back then. How do you even begin to attack a place like that?
Well, Alexander, he was never short on audacity, right? So he decides to build a causeway.
A what?
A causeway, it's like a land bridge.
Okay.
Connecting the mainland to the island.
He built a road across the sea to attack a city?
That took months.
Wow.
Months of labor engineering. And it was a testament to just the skill of his army. They literally reshaped the landscape. But the siege itself, it revealed a side of Alexander that's, well, it's pretty disturbing.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to like where this is going.
Yeah, the citizens of Tyre, they fought so hard.
Yeah.
But eventually the city fell. And Alexander, he was so enraged by their resistance that he ordered this just brutal crackdown. I mean, thousands were slaughtered.
Oh my gosh.
The survivors were sold into slavery. It was just this chilling example of what Alexander was capable of.
It's a good reminder that even history's greatest leaders, they're still human. They're flawed.
Oh, absolutely.
And this wasn't just an isolated incident for Alexander. He really used fear as a strategy.
Oh, absolutely. The siege of Tyre, it sent a very clear message. Defy Alexander, and this is what happens to you.
Wow. It's a lot to process. This blend of strategic genius and then utter ruthlessness.
Yeah.
It's a lot. What do you make of this darker side of Alexander?
You know, it's the question that's haunted historians for centuries.
Yeah.
And it becomes even more fascinating as we learn about some of his more personal moments. Like, for example, his visit to the tomb of Achilles.
Oh, yeah, that's where we get a glimpse beyond the conqueror.
Exactly.
And we see a little bit of the man himself. So we left off talking about Alexander's visit to the tomb of Achilles.
Yeah.
It seems like a small moment when you think about, like, the scope of his conquests.
Yeah.
But it says a lot about his aspirations.
It's this really revealing moment, I think, into Alexander's psyche. So
Yeah.
you got to picture him like standing there before the tomb of his childhood hero, right? This demigod, Achilles, whose fame has echoed through the ages.
Right.
And Arian tells us that Alexander saw himself in Achilles, this warrior destined for greatness. He even supposedly said that he envied Achilles for having Homer as his storyteller.
Wow. So it wasn't enough to conquer the known world.
No.
He wanted to be remembered like as a legend.
He wanted that lasting fame.
It's like he almost felt the weight of history on him,
Yes.
driving him to do something incredible. And that drive, I mean, that's kind of what leads him eastward, right?
Yeah.
To India, into uncharted territory.
Totally.
And that brings us to a battle that honestly sounds like something out of a fantasy novel.
I know, right?
Alexander versus King Porus at the Battle of the Hydaspes River.
It's a good one.
This wasn't just any battle. We're talking war elephants here.
Yeah, you can practically hear the ground shake, right?
Right.
King Porus, his army had these massive war elephants. They're draped in armor. Their tusks are fitted with blades. Just imagine the sight of these behemoths.
Oh, I can only imagine. So how do you fight an enemy that's basically a walking tank?
Right.
Was Alexander intimidated?
Alexander intimidated. Never. But he recognized that this was a different kind of challenge. This wasn't Persia. He had to adapt.
Okay, so what did he do? What were the tactics here?
So Alexander, he realizes that elephants, for all their size and power, they can be vulnerable to panic.
Okay.
So he made sure his troops were super mobile. They were raining javelins and arrows down on the elephants, confusing them, causing them to rampage.
Oh, very clever. Using their strength against them.
Exactly.
I bet it took nerves of steel to stand up to those charging elephants. So what happened? Who won?
It was a decisive victory for Alexander, which, no surprise there.
Right.
But, and this is what I love about this story, Alexander shows mercy to the defeated King Porus.
Mercy. Really? After that battle? That doesn't sound like Alexander.
I know. It's really interesting. So instead of like imprisoning him or executing him, he allows Porus to keep his kingdom. He makes him a vassal,
Savvy.
Yeah. It was a really calculated move. It ensures the stability of this new territory. But it also shows a certain amount of respect, I think, that Alexander had for Porus.
So he's not just interested in like burning everything to the ground.
Yeah.
He's playing the long game, building alliances. It's a different side to him.
He understood that there's more to power than brute force.
Right.
And, this actually wasn't an isolated incident. Alexander was genuinely interested in the people and cultures that he encountered. I mean, he brought historians and scholars along on his campaigns with him.
Really?
Yeah. They were documenting languages, customs, the natural world.
So he's like a walking, talking research expedition.
Exactly.
Leaving a trail of knowledge in his wake.
He was thirsty for knowledge.
I love that.
As much as he was for conquest, he saw himself as like a bridge between East and West, a unifier.
That's amazing. I wish we had time to dive into all those discoveries he made, but sadly, all good things must come to an end, right?
They do.
And this next part is where I think even the most hardcore Alexander fans have to admit that he wasn't perfect. Tell me about the mutiny at the Hyphasis River.
Okay. So imagine you're one of Alexander's soldiers, right?
Okay.
You've been marching for years, thousands of miles from home, fighting battle after battle.
Yeah.
You've seen your friends die, faced incredible hardship, right? And yet Alexander, with all his ambition, he wants to keep going.
Oh, no, this is not going to go well.
He wants to push further east, across the Hyphasis River, into lands unknown. And his troops, they're exhausted. They're homesick. Morale is at an all-time low. They finally reach their breaking point. They refuse to go any
He
further.
refused to go. What did Alexander do?
Well, he was furious.
I bet he was.
This wasn't just a little disagreement. This was a full-blown mutiny.
Wow.
Direct challenge to his authority.
So what happened? Did he have them executed?
He was angry. He retreated to his tent, fuming, refused to speak to anyone. And this is where we see that other side of Alexander again,
Okay.
He listens.
All right.
He may have been king, a conqueror, but he was also a pragmatist. He realized he'd pushed his men as far as they could go.
He backed down. Alexander the Great backed down.
He did.
Wow.
He agreed to turn back, much to the relief of his army.
What?
And it's this pivotal moment because it shows that even Alexander, for all his ambition, understood the limits of his power.
Right.
He couldn't conquer the world if his own army wouldn't follow him.
Yeah. What a humbling moment, even for Alexander.
It's a good reminder that even the greatest leaders, they aren't infallible.
No.
They make mistakes, they miscalculate,
Yeah,
and they have to make really tough choices.
they do. And in this case, Alexander chooses to listen,
He does.
to turn back, and it really speaks volumes about his leadership.
Yeah.
That's that complexity
Mm.
that makes Alexander so fascinating. But even legends, they're not immune to time.
No, they're not.
And sadly, Alexander's time was cut short. How did the reign of Alexander the Great come to an end? It's hard to believe someone who did so much, who left such a mark on the world, was only 32 when he died.
Yeah, it's a tragic end to an epic story.
Hmm.
Alexander the Great, conqueror, explorer, king, died in Babylon in 323 BC.
So what happened?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Assassination. Some ancient disease.
Arian, good old reliable Arian, he lays out all the theories.
Okay.
Doesn't really pick sides.
Which I respect.
Yeah, some say fever,
Okay.
maybe malaria, typhoid, something like that. Wouldn't be surprising given the conditions in Babylon back then.
Right.
Others, well, they whisper about poison, which, let's be honest, always a popular theory when it comes to powerful rulers.
Intrigue. I love it.
Mhm.
So no real answers. Just a good old-fashioned mystery.
I think there's something kind of fitting about that, don't you?
Yeah.
Alexander's life, it was full of questions, contradictions. Why should his death be any different?
That's a good point. It's on us to look at the evidence and see what we think. But we don't need to know exactly how he died to see his impact, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Alexander's conquests, they practically redrew the map.
Completely changed the world. He spreads Greek culture, language across continents, and sets the stage for the whole Hellenistic period, which, by the way, was this amazing era of cultural exchange.
So he wasn't just about military domination.
No, not at all. He brought ideas with him, knowledge.
A whole way of life, it sounds like.
He was driven, definitely, but he was also, like we were saying before, he loved knowledge. He wanted to connect with the world.
It's amazing to think about. This guy who challenged everything, defied expectations, and, well, left a legacy that we're still talking about today.
He really does make you think, doesn't he? About power, leadership.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from his early victories all the way to India. And, we saw the good, the bad, everything in between. Alexander the Great really did live up to his name.
He was a true force of nature, a product of his time, sure, but also someone who, breaks free from those constraints. He reminds us that history isn't just dates and names. It's about people.
And those people are complicated, they're messy, and I think that's why we love learning about them. Alexander's story it's a good reminder that things aren't always so black and white.
Well said. And as we wrap things up here, I'm left with one final question for you all to ponder. What if Alexander had lived longer? How would the world be different?
Ooh, that's a good one. Would he have kept conquering? Or would he have settled down, focused on actually governing his massive empire?
We'll never know, but it just goes to show you the impact of this one person, that centuries later we're still asking, what if?
History is a story that never really ends, is it?
Though,
Well, on that note, we'll leave Alexander to the history books, at least for now. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Be sure to check out the show notes for even more on Alexander, Arian, and, honestly, a ton of other stuff you can get lost in. Until next time, keep asking those questions, keep exploring, and keep on diving deep.